Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon, releasing June 10th, 2023. Pre-orders available now. Overwatch has become kind of a joke in the past couple of years. People are beginning to notice that the game balancing is trash, the updates are terrible, Blizzard is canceling critical features that have been hyped up for years now. There's been all these revelations, all this discussion, and people are starting to acknowledge that Overwatch is not what it was hyped up to be. Obviously, I would have told you this back in 2015 when the game came out, but it's been like a long, hard road. In a lot of ways, I think Overwatch was the last real AAA game that received the kind of worship, hype, and praise that we learned to expect over the past decade, right? From 2007 to 2016, right? There was this big thing, right? Where every single big non-Nintendo game that came out, from Assassin's Creed to Dead Space to Mass Effect to Spec Ops: The Line, right? Like every single thing that came out was worshipped by the gaming media, worshipped by gamers as being innovative, mature, story-driven games for older audiences that destroyed everything Nintendo was doing, right? Overwatch, in a lot of ways, I think was the last example of that. Like the last time that anyone really believed it, right? After that point, we got games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and The Last of Us Part 2, which were clearly downgrades from the previous entries. And so like people started unraveling the vast conspiracy of game journalists promoting bad games in order to get a paycheck. But that doesn't mean that Overwatch 1 was not a bad game. That does not mean that Overwatch 1 did not have problems, right? Like, even though that people worshipped Overwatch, thought it was the biggest thing ever, still continue to pretend as if this was like, Blizzard's last high point before the decline, rather than like, another entry in the company's fading into irrelevancy. Even though people like to pretend that Overwatch 1 was good, it was never true. And one of the interesting aspects that I noticed, something that I see like a lot of people getting wrong in documentaries about this, talking about Overwatch and, talking about like its rise and fall from prominence. One of the things I've seen is people claiming that Overwatch sold 50 million units, right? That is not true. That is straight up untrue. What actually happened is that Blizzard got 50 million players. And the thing is, that is completely different than 50 million units sold, because Overwatch is a title that had free weekends, that had, all these alternative ways of playing the game that did not require you to buy it. They were doing giveaways, they were doing this and that. There were ways to get that number up to 50 million. And it's not even like 50 individuals, right? Because of the way this system works, you can actually technically like jump from platform to platform and be considered like a different player, right? You can like go to Korea and play the game at like an internet cafe, and then like you're considered an individual player, right? You can like there are all these ways to inflate this number. It's nowhere near 50 million 50 million players. That was the issue here, is that they conflated units sold with the player base, right? It was nowhere near that popular at any span of its lifespan. And this isn't the only game where they do this, right? Sea of Thieves is another example where I've seen like Microsoft claim the game has 30 million players in spite of like it being a notorious bomb that no one cares for, and it's only being supported because of Game Pass. Right? There are like examples as to like it's common with these free-to-play games, like these big live service, like online multiplayer things, like in order to create this illusion that this game is a lot more popular than it actually is, right? now that like World of Warcraft has been like declining in subscriber numbers, Blizzard has been actively hiding them, right? For this reason, they don't want people to realize that the player base has been dwindling to nothing, right? They don't want people to realize that like the game isn't considered fun anymore by the masses because they know it's going to cause a domino effect where people start realizing that like, wow, if this game isn't popular, why am I playing it, right? If it's this massively like online thing, why would I waste my time with it? If nobody else in the community is playing, enjoying this game, why should I? And again, this was what Overwatch was kind of relying on throughout its entire lifespan, was this like creating this illusion that it was incredibly popular. You would have YouTubers making videos on the lore and stuff like that, and the story and like the characters, when nobody really cares that much outside of how much they want to bang the female protagonist. You had people like trying to like put on this facade that like, oh, it's the only popular colorful shooter in existence, which isn't true. You had people like hyping up the porn, even though the characters aren't all that attractive. You had like all of this. You had all of this propaganda. You had all of this like top tier marketing. You had all this big push, and initially it was successful. But the thing is, eventually the cracks started to show, and people started realizing that like, wow, Overwatch is not a very fun game. So what happens? Blizzard is forced into like soft rebooting the game into Overwatch 2. It's nearly identical with worse balancing, with characters that nobody cares about, with the promise of the eventual PvE mode, which never comes to be, right? They promise all this stuff and they undeliver. Like, it's basically the same exact game with balance problems, right? Overwatch 2 is worse than the original, right? It's not an improvement or an evolution like Splatoon 3 and 3, where they completely botched it, right? And because they botched it, because they did this, the audience has been turning on them, and I'm curious to see if this is going to result in the brand being diminished even further. Like, when exactly are we going to reach the point where like Overwatch's servers are down for good? Because I really do feel at this point, like once Overwatch is taken down forever, nobody's gonna miss it. Like, it reminds me of like how World of Warcraft was like the big thing in the mid 2000s, and by even within a couple of years, I knew people who were like trying to break their addiction to it. It's not because the game is so fun that they can't do anything else in their lives. It was designed to be addicting, right? It was designed to keep people playing regardless of like their personal lives or what was going on or what they wanted to do. Like, you had to like be playing this game all the time, connecting with other people, getting on at certain times with certain groups of people to do raids. It was basic. You had to basically revolve your life around this game. And, so many normal people I knew like despised that about it, right? Like, whatever positive aspects the game had, it was unplayable for that reason. I think Overwatch in a lot of ways is going to have like the same kind of like backlash towards it. I think more and more people are getting sick of like the microtransactions and just the general structure, and we've gotten to the point now where like Blizzard is trying to give the game away for free. Overwatch 2 is a free download, and nobody really cares all that much. Like, is Overwatch 2 really competing with like its competitors, like with Fortnite? Like, is it even competing with Destiny 2? I don't know, right? Like, I don't really like keep track of this. I don't think there's any real way to keep track of it because, as I mentioned in this video, the numbers are so fake. But looking at Overwatch, looking at its like decline of popularity, and you really get this sense that like Nintendo really, really hit it out of the park with Splatoon, right? Splatoon was like the polar opposite of Overwatch, with like, game critics saying it was going to be a failure. I remember when people were saying it was going to sell like 400,000 units total and then be forgotten. I remember people saying it was a ripoff of other games like Color Wars and Deep Blob and stuff like that. I heard people say it was going to be a failure. What happens? It becomes one of Nintendo's most successful IPs, right? And that popularity is only going to grow as the audience gets older and becomes like, more involved in the gaming sphere, right? The problem right now is that like you legit have a bunch of YouTubers like trying to downplay the game, like, oh, it's only for kids, with ignoring the fact that like that's what games are. They're supposed to be fun things for kids, right? They completely have they've. It's so weird seeing someone like Oni Plays, doing a playthrough of a Sonic game. Oh, Splatoon is for kids. It's such like it's such an ignorant way of criticizing any kind of media property, right? It's such a desperate attempt at downplaying this game, right? When Overwatch was a bright, colorful shooter, it was fun and innovative, right? Oh, it's so much different than what we usually see. And then when you see Splatoon, like, oh man, it's for kids. Like, it's only popular in Japan. It'll never take off here. Ignoring how popular it is here as well. Like, it is ridiculous, right? And the thing is, though, that Splatoon is only going to gain in popularity, right? When Foam Stars was announced and people saw how big of a ripoff of Splatoon it was, like, a lot of people got upset, right? Even like someone like Angry Joe, who hates Splatoon and will never play it, like, oh man, this game looks terrible. It's a knockoff of Splatoon. And then he like tried like spinning it, like, oh, these vehicles, that there's nothing like that in Splatoon, which isn't actually true, but it's like, really? You're really going to try to do this? You're really going to try and pretend that Foam Stars has like there's any possibility that it's going to compete with Splatoon, right? It's just not going to happen. Like, over the next couple of decades, Splatoon is going to grow and become bigger than Overwatch, bigger than all of its competitors. It's going to be like the de facto like entry level shooter franchise for kids, right? And nobody wants to admit it because the writing is on the wall. Nintendo is going to dominate the online shooter space after like an entire decade of not having of being like behind in that specific field, right? In that specific genre. And the industry, who is entirely reliant on these games to keep themselves relevant, is desperately trying to keep that from happening. Like, Overwatch, in a lot of ways, was like the only thing standing in the way from Splatoon and total market dominance, right? And now that Overwatch is out of the way, what's going to happen? Like, it's going to be an interesting situation when, like, as Overwatch fades from irrelevancy and Splatoon like explodes. It can't be stopped. Nintendo can't be destroyed. They will not go out of business. They will continue growing and putting out new interesting games despite what the industry wants you to think. And when it comes to Overwatch, in spite of how hyped it was, in spite of how worshipped it was, in spite of like how allegedly popular it was, it's facing the same fate that every other non-Nintendo game is facing, in that nobody will remember or care about it 20 years from now.